Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. The Reserve Bank is operating in a fairytale world where big external price makers just don't exist. That's according to our regular economics commentator, University of Melbourne professor Neville Norman. He's asking us to challenge the conventional wisdom and start attributing inflation to macroeconomic and overseas influences beyond the RBA's control. Neville starts by explaining why we should question the current interest rate mechanism to Jeff Waters.
I place on record that economic research and evidence I've been involved in for a long time shows four really relevant things. One, interest rate rises have only a delayed and a weak effect in curbing our spending. They impact on housing and asset markets directly, but we divert our spending and save to preserve what we spend. Point two, those rises thus and also have little effect in curbing inflation, despite what the RBA is telling you, or economic activity supporting your business revenue streams. That may be good news. Three, the most recent inflation comes from price makers with power and is not deterred by lesser spending, even recession in our economy. It's standing there right before you. You see it every day. World oil and energy prices, not impacted by the RBA. Translated by energy regulation and supply companies. Also, government-imposed transport charges and indirect taxes, we all know. Plenty of them we see in the news. Clubs, sporting and business, with long waiting lists, surging fees and prices. Suppose 15% increase and 5% of the members leave and 5% of the waiting list goes, the volume stays the same. And the RBA itself, a classic price maker, unrestrained by whatever we spend. Yet, point four, the RBA mechanically reacts to reported consumer price rises or unemployment falls without detailed or any regard to the power forces just mentioned that it hardly touches. Despite the uplift in electricity prices in July, inflation on every test is softening, and we must be nearing the end of this round of rate rises, even on the RBA professed logic. In fact, journalist Alan Kohler has gone on to say that he's pretty well certain that that's it, that in a year's time you won't see it any further. Not so blunt about that. Fears of inflation rising higher than 8% have clearly abated, and the 5% annual number or lower is now more likely.
You mentioned price makers being the cause of the most recent inflation, and the RBA being one of those, but it's only one of those, isn't it? It cannot possibly control all of those price makers that you mentioned, and as a result, is the whole mechanism failing?
Well, just to clarify, Jeff, the RBA is making its own price the interest rate. It doesn't directly control any of the others.
No.
And it's only very oblique, the way it indirectly controls. And very simply, there's sort of two approaches in economics. One, the dominant one that most of the commentators have, is really school textbook stuff of an imaginary, let's say, fairy tale economy where there's a lot of small businesses and small buyers, no government, no multinational companies, no overseas sector, and supply and demand, and it's a telltale that the RBA language suggests that they live in that land. The world that I see has got big companies, big governments, regulators, and an overseas sector that pays no regard to what the RBA is doing, and that's the point I'm making.
Now, can business plan for any positives at all in the next financial year?
I've worked hard on this one and I've got some great news. I've got 6 points this time.
6 good points.
Number one, most rate rises, whatever they hurt, have already happened. Though some coming off fixed rates will still have to manage the increases. Point two, the spectacular return of overseas visitors, migrants and students will actually benefit many businesses, including smaller businesses we treasure. 3, the budget surplus. means that the proposed personal and business tax cuts will almost certainly go ahead. Code, small businesses will not have to fund any budget repair. 4, like it or not, the absence of elections in the political area is a stable backdrop for business. 5, the limited impact of rate rises on overall economic activity cuts, based on the economic research, limits any chance of recession or real damage to your business revenue streams. And point 6, pretty well stationary house prices, despite the negative effect of the rate rises and the positive effect of immigration, and stationary unemployment rates show significant resilience and thus comfort to business. I say this, the risk of recession is minimal. Slower growth without recession is more likely, with plenty of business opportunities, not least from our growing labour force.
So where to from here?
Well, in summary, everything here shows why supply, external and power forces do much more than the RBA decisions to impact inflation. And on that basis, any abatement in the Ukraine war, natural disasters and government price recoveries gives a significant chance of reduced inflation and rate cuts down the track. I put that as the most likely scenario. Finally, the July rate pause does not mean no more rises, but it does mean we're near the top.
That was University of Melbourne economics professor Neville Norman. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.